Next question.
Prime Minister Brian Platt with Bloomberg. Yesterday, German Chancellor Scholz spoke with Vladimir Putin by phone, and we know that Ukrainian President Zelensky is not very happy about it. Do you think this was a good idea for Scholz and Putin to speak, and do you think other G7 leaders, such as yourself, at some point may need to open a line of communication to the Russian president?
I think we all understand how important it is to see an end to the violence in Ukraine, to see an end to conflicts around the world, and that requires a level of engagement with counterparts who, in many cases, we disagree with. I know there's a lot of work to do to see the conflict in the illegal invasion of Ukraine ended. We're continuing to engage closely with Zelensky and with Ukrainians. I think it's a good thing that there are conversations around this, but the level of trust that I have for Vladimir Putin is probably at an all-time low right now.
Looking ahead to Rio and the uncertainty about future U.S. support for Ukraine, what are you looking for from other G20 countries about filling that gap if Trump pulls funding partially or fully? And what kind of commitments, new commitments, is Canada prepared to make in Rio?
Well, first of all, our priority is to try and see a ceasefire, to try and see an end to this illegal invasion by Russia as quickly as possible. And there are perhaps windows in which that might be able to happen in the coming months. We're always hopeful that we will be able to get to a peace in that situation that will demonstrate that we are standing up for the international rules-based order and the UN Charter. But let's also be very blunt. All the allies in the world would not be able to replace a complete withdrawal from supporting Ukraine by the United States. And that's why the conversations about why it's so important to stand up to Russian bullies, why it's so important to be there to defend the international rules-based order are continuing across allies, including with the United States.
Evan Dyer, CBC News. Prime Minister, you just talked about the goal in Ukraine being a ceasefire. In the past, you've talked about...
Sorry, not a ceasefire, an end to the conflict and a peace.
Okay. In the past, you've used the word victory. And I just want to ask you if, under the new circumstances, if the goal is still victory at all costs over Russia and Ukraine, or if it has moved a bit.
The fundamental challenge we face is that Russia violated some pretty basic principles of the international rules-based order. They violated the UN Charter. They are trying to demonstrate that if you have a big enough army, you can redraw lines on the map that have been established for 70-plus years since the UN came into being. Any victory on that issue by Russia, any demonstration that if you have a bigger army, you get to redraw lines on a map, would have devastating consequences, not just for Ukraine, but obviously for Ukraine and Ukrainians, but for the entire world. How many countries have a neighbor that has a historical claim over this corner across the river where their citizens used to live, or that got rejigged 100 years ago? How many conflicts have been averted because the world has agreed that you may not like the borders where they are, but they are where they are, and they hold, and the world is willing to enforce those lines on a map? The fact that Russia has chosen to redraw those lines on the map is the thing that worries people the most around the world. And that's why it is so important that Ukraine wins this conflict, that Russia loses this conflict, that no one will look at Putin and say, well, it was a hassle, but he did get those territories that proved that might can sometimes make right. This is the stability of the global economy. It's the well-being of billions of people at play. And that's the principle for which we are collectively standing up when we are unequivocal that we will be with Ukraine with whatever it takes until they win.